Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mouth of Time podcast brought to you by the Shields Gazette. I'm Dominic Scurr, joined as ever by Joe Buck to discuss everything surrounding Newcastle United at the moment. It's been quite slow with the international break, but plenty of Newcastle's players have been in action, and there's still plenty to talk about looking ahead to the return to Premier League action as well as the Champions League to come. So, first of all, Joe, been a while since our last podcast, but how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thanks. I'm much like you. I'm so ready for Newcastle to come back. I think international breaks are, not ideal at the best of times, and but on the back of three defeats in a row, there's nothing really. As I say, Newcastle, you just want to get the games back, don't you? And as I say, with Champions League coming, they're going to be coming thick and fast. So I think me, you, and much of everyone else is just ready for the return of club football.
Yeah. It was a frustrating been a frustrating start to the season, really. After we spoke last time, the highs of that Aston Villa game, and you're thinking, wow, the sky's the limit for Newcastle, but very quickly brought back down to earth. The Man City defeat, you sort of half expect um, Newcastle have lost, I think, 14 in a row there now. The Liverpool one, particularly hard to take, and then the Brighton one just sort of rubs salt into the wounds. So, yeah, what have you made of Newcastle's start of the season in general, really?
I think, pretty much as you say, I think it was obviously such a high start, and everyone's elated. Everyone's thinking, right, this is it. Newcastle are back, and then as you say, back down to earth to them three defeats. They are disappointing. There's no getting away from that. Eddie Howe will be disappointed. He said on numerous occasions he's been disappointed. I think the ones that will hurt will be the Liverpool and the manner of that Liverpool defeat, and then I think the manner of the Brighton defeat as well. We knew it was going to be a difficult game going down to Brighton, but they just never seemed to. Other than the first sort of 10, 15 minutes, that was it. Brighton took control and they never really looked like getting back into it. I think the panic maybe from some fans is maybe a bit over the top, and I think any worries that Newcastle won't be back up to the levels were last year. I think there will be. I think you've got to remember that it's been such a tough start to play Liverpool, Man City, and Brighton and Aston Villa. It's a tough start, and if you look at the results last year, they were only 1 point below in the corresponding games last year. So you think about that, and you think, well, it has been a difficult start. It's been a shame that they've been beaten three times already. They only lost 5 games last year, but I think it just makes Brentford massive on Saturday. I think if they can get back on Saturday and they can have a win and a statement win as well, a bit like that Villa game, I think everyone's concerns will just go and everyone will be right. That was just a blip, hopefully just a blip, and that they can get back to playing, back to the football we saw against Villa, because they were untouchable at times that game.
Yeah, it was always going to be a really tough start to the season. Like you say, I don't think Newcastle could have asked for a more difficult start to the season without raising some serious questions to the Premier League. But yeah, Brentford, it doesn't get much easier. Brentford again finished in the top half last season. Tricky opponents. To, as much as Newcastle did beat Brentford twice last season and beat them, I think 5-1 in this fixture at St James's Park last year, I think they have given them a game twice for me. I think up until the 60-minute mark at St James's Park, it was similar to the Villa game, first game of the season. It was a close contest. Brentford had an early goal disallowed. So they'll be another tough opponent for Newcastle this weekend.
Absolutely will be. I think you're right. Brentford are, one of them teams you don't want to play at any point, really. I think the only thing going in Newcastle's favour is probably the Ivan Toney factor. He loves a goal against Newcastle, and I think him not being there. I know Brentford have coped well so far this season without him, but I just think him not being there, he seems to play a little bit extra, put that little bit more in when he's against Newcastle. It seems that way anyway. So I think him not being there will be a big miss for Brentford. And as you say, it will be, if they can get a win, it will be a big statement at the back. We've seen Newcastle a couple of times last year come back from setbacks and really put in statement performances. You think back to that Spurs one back in April, they'd just been beat by Villa 3-0 and everyone's a bit, how they're going to get on, and then all of a sudden, well, we all know what happened that game and in the games around that. So yeah, it's going to be a big test for Eddie Howe's team on Saturday, but I think they've got the quality to do it. They've just got to get that mentality, and and hopefully the crowd will be behind them. And if it does start off slow, like that game, like this fixture last year, that the crowd sticks with them, because they're going to need that. Because as you say, Brentford a really tough game.
It's going to be important, and then another important thing is who Newcastle will have a bit available for that game. The international break, we've seen a couple of injuries. Elliot Anderson's withdrawn from the Scotland squad. Sandro Tonali missed out on Italy's Euro 2024 qualifier last night, both due to injuries. Sven Botman's obviously been out with an ankle issue, and then you've got the longer term issues with Emil Kraft and Joe Willock. So, what do you make of the injury situation going into the game? And do you think it's realistic to expect any of these players to be back in the squad and starting this weekend?
I would like to hope so. I think my main concern is the middle of the park. I think, as you say, with Willock obviously being injured, he's probably going to be out till the next international break. So, you forget about him for the next few weeks. You've got Tonali, as you say. And then even got players like Bruno and Joe Linton who are coming back from Brazil. They're only going to get, or they're come back today. So they're only going to have maybe 1 or 2 days training with the group. Now, there's no worries about them not knowing what they're doing, what their roles are. But that's, that kind of traveling and that, their games are going to take its toll. So I am a little bit concerned about the middle of the park. I think it's one of them ones where I think Eddie Howe will probably go with Sean Longstaff for me. I think he's had a couple of weeks in that, in training. And for me, I think there's no point risking Tonali or either the Brazilians if either they're, fatigued or picked up or not, especially with that game against AC Milan coming up. I think that it might just be a case of sort of not resting necessarily, but just managing the minutes and expectations, because we're going to see that over the next few weeks. Lots of these players are going to have their minutes managed. We've seen it with Callum Wilson in the past. No doubt Trippier will probably have to have some of his minutes sort of managed because he played for England. He's played pretty much every game for Newcastle when he's been available. So all these players are going to be rotated in. Now, the good thing for Eddie Howe is the fact he has got a lot of options in areas. The one place maybe he hasn't got the options he'd like would be in centre half, and it'll be interesting to see if Botman's fit, whether he comes straight back in and how they sort of manage that back four, because it didn't really work against Brighton with Target, Burn, Share, and Trippier in there. So I don't know what you think, but my main concern would be the midfield and who plays in the middle of the park on Saturday.
Yeah. I think the midfield has been a big talking point since the start of the season. We spoke after the Villa game about how good Sandro Tonali looked, and Bruno as well, and Joe Linton didn't have his best game, but that three looked like it would be Newcastle's midfield three, strongest midfield three, and that's continued the first 4 games of the season. But since that Villa game, it's just been lacking, hasn't it? I think anyway. And Bruno hasn't really reached the levels we know he's capable of. Joe Linton as well. I think Tonali, as good as he's probably been the best of the three, but as good as his debut was, just hasn't really hit the heights of that since. So what are you thinking of the sort of midfield three at the moment, and that midfield three in particular?
Yeah, it does look. I wouldn't say unbalanced because I think that's harsh, but I do think there needs to be some sort of a little bit of work on it, because they've been overrun in the last couple of games, or they've not been able to get control, put it that way, of that, and that's been their strength certainly last year. And in that Villa game, they have been very good in midfield, and they've got very good players in there. That's clear. So I think Eddie Howe will work on it, and I think maybe that 2-week break has come at the right time to sort of work on the balance of that midfield. I like Bruno further up, but I get that he's probably the best option of the 6. So it's really open. You'd probably want Bruno in all 3 positions, really. But if you're gonna pick one, you probably want him there. I think the big miss is Joe Willock. I don't think any fans realised, and we probably didn't. We probably took for granted his influence and how much Newcastle will miss Joe Willock in that midfield. So it'll be interesting how he gets on, what he selects for the next 4 games. As I said, I'll stick my neck out. And I think Sean Longstaff will feature on Saturday, and it'll probably be Bruno Longstaff and maybe Joe Linton or Tonali, depending on the seriousness of Tonali's injury. So that'll be my guess for his midfield 3 on Saturday.
Yeah, and Sean Longstaff's a big one, because I think he's not the glamorous option, but he's a player who, when he's not in the side, like we saw away at Villa last year and that period towards the end of the season, when he didn't start games, players like Bruno, like Joe Linton, got a little bit more exposed, and Newcastle's midfield lacked a bit of cohesion. And Tonali's probably viewed as the sort of upgrade on Longstaff, if you like, but I think he still has an important role to play, and I think Eddie Howe would echo that as well. And I guess moving on a similar topic, we discussed this earlier in the week. If you're looking at Newcastle's strongest 11, a case could be made. You have Joe Willock back in the side, and then you play Joe Linton out on the left wing. But then at the same time, Newcastle have just spent best part of £80 million on left wingers this year, and Anthony Gordon and Harvey Barnes. So looking at the team, I think the back four and the goalkeeper picks itself. But if I'm putting to you, what's Newcastle's strongest sort of front six, if you like? It's a tough question.
It is. I think I would go with Bruno, Tonali, and Joe Linton in the middle of the park, just because we haven't seen Willock in so long. I think once he's back in form, then Joe Linton position might be under threat there. I think in the front three, now we're going to probably have that debate, and this is a debate that's gone on social media for as long as he's been at the club, really, but especially over the last few weeks. Miguel Almiron maybe doesn't contribute the goals and assists he should, other than a very good sort of purple patch last year, but he's clearly one of Eddie Howe's favourites. And in terms of out and out right wingers, the club don't have any other than maybe Jacob Murphy. Then you're looking at shoehorning either Anthony Gordon that way or Harvey Barnes, and then it gets a little bit messy. So for me, you've got to have Almer on there. I think Isak just edges Wilson, and then you're looking at probably Anthony Gordon because of his start. But I'm really excited to see, because we haven't seen much of Harvey Barnes. As much as we were all excited and his performance in the Salah Cup and the Villa, we've not seen much of him since. So I'm really excited to see them two battle it out for that left wing position, because they're great options in there. But yeah, for me, it'll be Gordon, Isak, and Almiron for the front three.
Yeah, I'd largely agree. I think when you spend the sort of money they've spent on Anthony Gordon, Harvey Barnes, like they sort of have to be in this team, and the same goes for Tonali as well. There's obvious quality there. I mean, the choice between Barnes and Gordon, I'd probably boil down to goals. The fact Harvey Barnes has scored 14 goals since the start of last season, whereas Anthony Gordon, it's less than half of that. So in terms of figures, attacking threat, I'd probably go with Harvey Barnes. Having said that, I do think Anthony Gordon, out given it's been a fairly slow start for Newcastle this season, I think Anthony Gordon's been one of the better players. He was great against Villa opening day. I thought against Liverpool he was the best player. Then gets taken off and Newcastle fall apart. So yeah, I think there's certainly some positives to take from what has been a disappointing start of the season. I don't know, looking at the opening four games, Joe, whether you have anything you've been particularly encouraged by or particularly disappointed by in the games we've seen so far.
I think I don't want to be too negative. I think the one thing I've been disappointed by is probably the defense, not the defense individuals or anything, but just the resilience of the defense. We saw last year they kept so many clean sheets, especially the beginning half of the season. That was what they built everything on. In fact, actually, it was really they were struggling to score at the other end. There was a few 0-0 draws in there, which were a bit disappointing. But I mean, I think it's like 2 clean sheets in the last 24 games, something like that, and that is a worry because they built, as I said, last year was very much built on a very good defensive record, and this year they've conceded in every game. Obviously 3 to Brighton, with a couple were very, very unforced errors as well, and very, ones they would be very disappointed by. So I think that it would be nice to see them, fix that and get that defense shaped up again. But does that come at the balance of losing some going forward? Because they have struggled at times to break defenses down. We saw that last year, maybe against Liverpool as well. That when they sort of sat back, they didn't really create too many big opportunities. So it's going to be a tight balance to get the defensive side right and also not lose too much going forward. That might be where, fast wingers like Harvey Barnes, Gordon, Isak, that sort of, they come in the fore because maybe they can, play a bit more on the transition, on the counter. So it's a real head scratcher for Eddie Howe to try and fix that, because as we've mentioned, games don't get any easier, especially when you come to the Champions League. They're going to have to be solid at the back, because you concede 1 or 2 in any of them games and you're probably not winning many of them. So that'll be the one main concern I have from the beginning of the season, is how they get back to that defensive resilience that worked so well for them last year.
Yeah, I think my biggest sort of encouragement and concern almost go hand in hand. I think the encouraging thing for me, if you look at, we're talking about Newcastle's strongest 11 and the subs bench, and you're looking now, and it's getting to the point where the subs are players who 2 years ago would have been first team starters. Callum Wilson, excellent player, 18 goals last season, 2 goals already this season without starting a game. Players like that, Harvey Barnes has been on the bench, and then you look at the new signings as well, been on the bench. I think Newcastle's squad does look a lot stronger, but at the same time, what is a concern for me is Newcastle have spent 160 million in the summer transfer window, and not if you include the Lewis Hall sort of obligation, and not necessarily improved the starting 11 as such, other than Sandro Tonali, and discussed this at length on a number of occasions. But now the transfer window's closed, and you're looking, and you've got two strikers. Callum Wilson's been fit for the best part of a year, but he's getting older. He does have you can't hide from it. He does have a track record of injury. Alexander Isak missed a large period of last season as well due to injury. So there is a fragility to the squad at the same time. In certain positions, you mentioned the right wing position. I think Newcastle missed an opportunity when you're looking at Villa getting someone like Moussa Diaby, a long time target for Newcastle, who had by all accounts, a good game at St James's Park despite the 5-1 defeat. And you're looking at your right wing options, Miguel Almiron, Jacob Murphy, for a top 4 side or Champions League side. That for me isn't quite good enough. And then I think the big one, you've spent the best part of 60 million on 2 fullbacks who can't get in the side. And that, for me, if you can spend 60 million pound elsewhere, okay, wages are a big factor, but if you could have spent even 40 million pounds on an attacker or a proven centre back, because we're looking now, Jamal Lascelles is the backup centre back, and then there's Alex Murphy. There's not much else, and like you say, the defence, the lack of pace has been exposed a few times, and they don't look anywhere near as strong as they did during the first half of last season. So, yeah, I have a few concerns after the transfer window in terms of the players Newcastle have brought in. Not that I have anything against the particular players they brought in, just about the money they've spent and whether they're planning more for the future than now. I don't think the squad is quite prepared to mount another top 4 charge while competing in the Champions League and being competitive on all 4 fronts, if you like. And I think it could have been had they invested the money in a certain way. I don't know how you feel. I've sort of rambled on a bit there, gone in circles, but yeah, I don't know how you feel about the
No,
transfer
I think
business, Joe.
Yeah, I think it's one. If you look back on maybe 2 or 3 years' time, they might look back and say, actually, that was a brilliant window. They got Lewis
Yeah.
Hall and Tino Livramento now. They could be England regulars in the future, and then Newcastle could have both England fullbacks, for example, on either side. You could think Sandro Tonali's now getting into his prime, same with Harvey Barnes. But right now, was it the window Newcastle necessarily needed at this point? I don't know. I think if we'd finished that window, even if we'd got someone at centre back on loan, even if it was cover, look at someone like, for example, Harry Maguire. I know that all the England stuff, but someone like him where you think that I actually rate Harry Maguire, but that's another conversation in the podcast. But if we've got someone like him or someone just with a bit of either Premier League proven as a loan option, as a sort of cover for in case people like Sven Botman got injured. Fabian Schär, he's been really good. He doesn't always get injured, but he always has, he always picks up injuries, niggles after going in all these tough challenges and whatnot. So I do worry about that centre back position. I think that was one place Newcastle went in the window needing to strengthen, and the one place they come out with it not strengthening it. I think the right wing is, you are right. I think they've probably got enough cover if they do want to shift anyone across in terms of either side. But I do worry about the centre back slot. But overall, I think it was a solid window. They have spent a lot of money and they are sort of solidifying their future. They have got a lot of options for the future. It's just, they've been hamstrung by financial fair play, and they've probably done what the best they can with that. And it's a shame that Newcastle, who have got all this money, with owners who want to put it in the right place, who have qualified for the Champions League, can't spend this money, because of financial fair play reasons. And other teams like Chelsea and all that can do that because of their history. So it's a frustrating one, and it's one that Newcastle hopefully in a few years' time won't have to worry too much about it. But as you say, that all depends on them requalifying for the Champions League or qualifying for Europe on a season by season basis. And to do that, you've got to have the squad that competes. So it's a really fine balance. I would probably say I would give the window maybe an 8 out of 10. I think that centre back really would have pushed it up. But overall, it will probably be one where in two or 3 years' time we'll revisit, and I do think they'll go, actually, that was a really good window.
Yeah, I've gone on the record saying I think it's been a good window. I wouldn't maybe go quite as high as an 8, but I'd maybe with the caveat of in a few years' time, if Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall can establish themselves in the side, then yeah, it has been a good window. I just think, could Newcastle afford to spend £60 million on two players who, let's be honest, do lack a bit of Premier League experience? Okay, they're young and English, loads of potential, but they don't walk into the team. The left back position is still an area for contention. Dan Burns still starting there, or Matt Targett's coming in, and then does he drop down the pecking order with Lewis Hall coming in? There's all sorts of questions that will be answered over the next season or so. But yeah, I think there's a few sort of caveats to Newcastle's transfer window, to whether it's actually been a very good window or just a decent one for me. But moving on, yeah, transfer window is dead and buried until January at least. Looking ahead, we've discussed Brentford briefly, but after that, it's the big one really, the return to Champions League football. AC Milan at the San Siro on Tuesday night. Joe, are you it's a stupid question. Are you looking forward to that one?
I am very looking forward to that, Dom. I think it's the perfect draw. We were watching the Champions League draw at the end of last month. That was, when you see AC Milan, PSG, and Dortmund come out, you just think that would be fantastic if Newcastle got that group, and then to be drawn in that group to kick off then at the San Siro. Would I've preferred to be at St James's Park? Probably. I think I just want to hear that Champions League anthem at St James's Park, just from a pure selfish point of view. But I'll wait a couple more weeks. But I think it's a brilliant match, isn't it? And it's one that it's going to be the very best of Newcastle United in Europe, and it's iconic club and a club that, yes, 7-time European champions, but they're not. I'm not going to say they're beatable. I'm not going to go and say we're going to go stroll at San Siro and win 3-4-0. But they definitely have weaknesses, and it's definitely a team that Newcastle will feel they can get points at. It's going to be tricky. It's going to be a test for Eddie Howe as well as the team. There's not many people in there with Champions League experience, but it's going to be a fantastic occasion. I'm really looking forward to it on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think Newcastle go into the game as underdogs, but AC Milan are probably viewed as, of the three teams that have been drawn against, the most beatable, given PSG, a super club, the type of club Newcastle would probably aspire to be like in the next 5-10 years. And then Borussia Dortmund have been sort of European heavyweights for the best part of the last decade as well. So yeah, it's going to be tough, but I think the San Siro, like Newcastle been there before, but it's going to be a big one, and it's going to be fun. But I guess it's a tricky argument, because it's, as a fan, these are great clubs to play against. But from a competitive point of view, do you think Newcastle can get out of this group? Because it's a dream group if you're sort of a tourist, if you to go to these grounds and play these teams, and you'll certainly feel like you're in the Champions League, opposed to maybe getting some of the lesser teams. Say you got a Feyenoord, a Benfica, and a Copenhagen or something like that. That group wouldn't feel quite the same. But yeah, it's a difficult balance, isn't it, Joe, between competitiveness and actually wanting to enjoy it and be in
Yeah.
the Champions League.
I've always thought that with Newcastle have got a good chance purely because they've got to play 3 games at home. I think that if they can get a couple of wins from them and maybe nick a win away, or at least put up a good fight away from home, they've got every chance to qualify. And I think no team will want to come to Newcastle, I don't believe, especially in that these 3 games. Maybe in the few years in the future when it becomes a norm, hopefully the Champions League. But these Champions League nights are going to be special at St James, and I think that it's going to be mad to say that PSG, especially PSG, I think Dortmund and AC Milan are obviously, massive clubs, and they're used to playing in really sort of high-end atmospheres. But I think PSG, with the way they've been in the Champions League recently, you do feel that if you can get at them and you can get, the crowd up, that they are not prone to crumbling. Because I'm not, again, I'm not going to say we're going to beat PSG 5-0 here, but I'm going to say that the crowd can really, lift Newcastle and maybe disturb sort of PSG. So I do think St James's Park is going to be a massive factor. I think it'll be really interesting how they approach the AC Milan game. I think one criticism of Eddie Howe you could say is he maybe gives sort of the so-called bigger teams a bit too much respect away from home. We've seen it. We mentioned it after City away earlier in the season. We believe that Newcastle probably give them a little bit too much respect and didn't go at them enough. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach that game, whether they go and play a bit cagey or whether they go and just full of confidence and just say and try and stamp their authority on that game. But I do think there's chance of getting out of the group, and then if they don't finish in the top two, if they do finish third, they drop down the Europa League, and they've got every chance of going far in that competition as well if that happens. So I think whatever happens, I do believe Newcastle will be playing European football, some sort of European football after Christmas. That's my prediction. I'm not going to go out and say whether it's Champions League or Europa League, but they'll definitely still be in European competition next year.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough group. I think what you've touched on it there, the sort of group of death title that it's been given, a big part of that is Newcastle were the pot four team no one really wanted. I mean, you don't want to big Newcastle up too much here, but a Premier League team being in pot four is fairly unheard of. I can't remember the last time a Premier League team was in pot four. I'm not sure. So it's sort of Newcastle away, like you say, Premier League opposition. Newcastle squad will probably be more expensive, or more expensive in terms of transfer fees paid than certainly AC Milan and probably Dortmund as well. Almost definitely not PSG, but so you're looking at squad value. It is probably the second most. Whether they can translate that on the pitch and be competitive in the group is another question. It's a new experience for the club, and I think AC Milan's an interesting one because there's been a bit of sort of, I wouldn't say a rivalry between AC Milan and Newcastle, but there's been some interesting sort of transfer stories the past two summer windows where Sven Botman looks set to go to AC Milan, then U-turn goes to Newcastle, and then the Sandro Tonali saga in the summer as well. So there's a few interesting stories there. It'll be interesting to see if Sandro Tonali is fit to play against Milan, what sort of reception he gets, because very well liked player at Milan, and hopefully he gets a good reception, even though the Italian media, when he did leave, were quick to say he didn't want to leave and he was crying and things like that. Those allegations have since been massively downplayed by Eddie Howe, by the player's agent and things like that. So hopefully he gets a good reception and puts in a good performance and is back available for that game at the San Siro, if not sooner, against Brentford on Saturday. And me and Joe will be at the game at Brentford on Saturday. I'll be back at Eddie Howe's press conference on Friday to see how things are shaping up, getting all the injury news and team news heading into that. And then we'll both be jetting off to Milan next week. So big games to look forward to. Nice to have club football back after the international break. And we'll have all the latest Newcastle United not transfer news, team news, rumours, whatever, over on the Shields Gazette website. So you can sign up for our latest newsletter and have all that delivered straight to your inbox. Just visit shieldsgazette.com/newsletter for more information on that. You can also check out later this week our latest exclusive video feature, Newcastle United's Road to Europe, over on Shots TV. If you're on the Shields Gazette website, it'll be in the top right-hand corner of your page. You can watch that. So check that out. But for now, thank you everyone for joining us and watching the Mouth of the Time podcast. Thanks, Joe, as ever, for joining me, and we'll see you all next time. Cheers.